With 2023 nearly in the bag, the only thing we can conclude from this year's events is that the global geopolitical situation has gone from bad to worse. The previous year was mired in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and though that story still looms large in the 2023 news cycle, there are other events that, though they might not be as world-changing, are just as shocking. Worse yet, many of those events point to a world that's on a slippery slope into chaos, and if issues keep escalating, could be on the brink of global war. Well, perhaps that's a little too dramatic, but we'll let you decide that by the end of the video. However, there is no denying that 2023 has been defined by explosive tensions and clever moves, occasionally by unexpected parties that have upset the global balance. And nowhere is that more obvious than the breakout of war between two countries that have long had issues with one another. Event 1. Tensions between Israel and Hamas explode. On October 7, 2023, Hamas launched its boldest attack against Israel yet. Hamas fighters attacked towns and military bases in southern Israel, killing an estimated 1,200 people and kidnapping around 240 soldiers and civilians in the process. The attack ignited the embers of the conflict that has existed between Israel and Hamas for years, and Israel's response was swift. As of the making of this video, the war has been going on for around a month and a half. Israel has essentially barricaded Gaza and the West Bank, making it almost impossible for aid, food, or medical equipment to enter those disputed territories. Most recently, Israel attacked the Indonesian-built hospital of Al-Shifa in Gaza, claiming it was being used as a military base for Hamas. At least 12 people died following those strikes, with Al Jazeera also reporting that the attack led to the evacuation of 28 premature babies to Egypt. Whether that hospital was really an operational base for Hamas is almost beside the point now. What's clear is that Israel is no longer pulling its punches. With the October 7th attacks fueling its rage, the country has collectively gotten behind its war effort to the point where calls for ceasefires or humanitarian pauses are going unheeded, and those calls have been coming thick and fast. France, Portugal, Spain, Turkey, and Ireland have all called for ceasefires. Interestingly, Russia is also calling for an end to the conflict, despite its own situation in Ukraine. And though Israel's staunchest ally, the US, hasn't joined those calls, it is clear that President Joe Biden is hoping for a peaceful solution. This would see the return of the 240 hostages, along with the potential for a two-state agreement where Palestine will finally be recognized by Israel. Frankly, that ceasefire seems unlikely to happen. Israel continues to attack the Gaza Strip, some argue justifiably, making the outbreak of the war one of the biggest geopolitical events of 2023. These events have the world divided, surprisingly even within countries that support Israel. But Israel's battle against Hamas could have knock-on effects for the entire Middle East, and potentially the rest of the world. What if Iran enters the fighting? It's been using Hamas and Hezbollah as proxies for years, and there's a chance that Israel may launch an attack on Iran in response if it overcomes Hamas in Palestine. What about Saudi Arabia? Prior to the outbreak of war, Israel and Saudi Arabia were on the verge of normalizing their diplomatic relationship. Now it looks likely that this normalization can't happen unless Israel makes some concessions to Palestine, a situation that looks highly unlikely. Those are just a couple of examples of the destabilizing effects that Israel's war with Palestine could have, or is already having in the Middle East. No matter the outcome, the possibility of war spreading beyond Israel is high. Event 2. The new Cold War between China and the US accelerates. In the backdrop of the fighting between Israel and Hamas is a hot war that the US wants no part of, and the ever-increasing tensions between America and China could give rise to a new Cold War that it also wants to avoid. But it may not have a choice if China continues in the same vein that it struck in 2023. According to China's own State Council Information Office, the country intended to raise its defense budget by 2023. The resulting increase would result in defense spending rocketing up to $225 billion, still far behind the US, which spent about $750 billion. Still, it puts China in second place in terms of military spending, and when you consider the fact that China's money stretches much further than America's, U.S. Air Force Major General Cameron Holt says that China is acquiring weapons at 5 to 6 times the rate of the U.S. The problem seems to be much, much worse. And there's more. Taiwan reports that China has increased the frequency of its military drills on the border between the two countries. As recently as November 19th, 9 Chinese aircraft crossed the median line in the Taiwan Strait, with China's Navy also becoming much more open about conducting drills near Taiwan shores. Add to that China's ever-expanding nuclear arsenal, with Pentagon reports stating that Beijing is on track to have 1,500 nuclear warheads by 2035. all at a time when the US is decommissioning much of its stockpile. Additionally, The Guardian reports that China is planning to build naval bases in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and Equatorial Guinea in the coming years, essentially giving itself more launching pads for potential direct conflicts in the future. That possibility of direct conflict is the biggest worry to come from all the moves China has been making. Though subtle and always accompanied by rhetoric stating that China is simply strengthening its defenses, these moves are indicative of a country that is increasingly prepared for war. The US will have to respond, with a new Cold War seeming increasingly likely thanks to China spending much of 2023 building up its power base. Event 3. War reignites in Sudan. Sudan is no stranger to civil war. Internal strife plagued the country until 2005, when an agreement was formed to create South Sudan, with the state officially being recognized in 2011. But even before that agreement, a separate conflict began in Darfur when rebel fighters started an insurrection in 2003 based on claims that the Sudanese government utterly disregarded its non-Arab population in the western region of the country. The war in Darfur raged until 2020, creating more conflict with South Sudan in the process. Sudan was by no means a nation in a healthy state at that point, but it appeared to have turned over a new leaf, with plans in place for a fully democratic election in 2022. Peace was practically brokered, at least until 2023 and the resumption of fighting in Darfur. It all started in April when the Sudan Armed Forces, or SAF, were involved in fighting with a paramilitary group called Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. Ironically, the leaders of those two groups, the SAF's Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the RSF's Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, were former allies. They cooperated to bring about the end of the Bashir regime that was responsible for the previous Darfur conflict, and had even worked together to execute a military coup that ended the hopes of democracy in the country. But power is a drug that neither could get enough of. Tensions began boiling around how the SAF would integrate the RSF into its forces. Those tensions reached their boiling point in April 2023, and the fighting has only intensified in the months that followed. Efforts to broker peace haven't been successful, with the U.S. Institute of Peace calling them uncoordinated and ineffectual. This has left Darfur in the same state it's been in for most of the 21st century, embroiled in civil conflict. Death and displacement reign once again. According to the UN, the death toll has risen to around 9,000 by the end of October 2023, with a further 5.6 million people being forced to flee. Even the most basic services are falling apart, leaving a further 25 million Sudanese people in dire need of aid. The fighting doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon, and while the war continues to rage in Sudan, the entire Northeast African region will remain destabilized. Event 4. Russia unveils its Sarmat missile system. It weighs more than 200 tons, and it can hold anywhere between 10 and 15 warheads, depending on which sources you believe. According to Al Jazeera, it gives whoever holds it the ability to launch nuclear missiles from the ground up to 11,000 miles away, essentially giving its owners the ability to conduct strikes on any country in the world. This veritable Wunderwaffe is the RS-28 Sarmat Intercontinental Ballistic Missile, or ICBM, and Russia confirmed it had entered into combat duty in September 2023. If we believe Moscow's telling the truth about this missile, which is doubtful to say the least, it would make the RS-28 the best ICBM in the world. Dubbed Satan II because of its supposed power, the missile can fly almost twice as far as America's current stock of outdated Minuteman III missiles. Furthermore, it can outstrip the technical specifications and the range of the upcoming LGM-35 Sentinel. Russia now has the ability to launch a nuke from almost anywhere within its borders and hit any target, especially in the United States, with very little notice. Given all that talk about the new Cold War between the US and China, as well as Russia's catastrophic failure in Ukraine, it's easy to forget that the country is still a military superpower, but the reveal of the Sarmat finally establishes Russia as the world's biggest nuclear threat, giving its title of a military superpower a bit more credence. Add to this Russia's increasingly strong ties with China, and our outlook on future global stability seems cloudy with a very good chance of rain. The Sarmat puts every other country with nuclear capabilities at a massive disadvantage, meaning the next Cold War may not be a predominantly two-country affair. It could be a handicap match with the US on the losing side when faced with an alliance between China and Russia. But Russia is far from the only country that flexed its missile-based might in 2023. Another country known for its anti-West rhetoric, as well as its ties to Russia, has also made the headlines. Event 5. North Korea fires ballistic missiles in Japan's direction. While Russia was working on making what they allegedly claim to be the most powerful ICBM the world has ever seen, North Korea was hard at work making an ICBM that it could actually fire. The world received confirmation that it had succeeded in April 2023 when North Korea launched its first working ICBM toward Japan. Thankfully, the launch was a test of sorts, though it's believed it came in response to supposed U.S. spy plane flights taking place near North Korea. Whatever the case may be, the missile flew for about 620 miles, crashing down into the waters just west of Japan's Hokkaido prefecture. It's also believed that the missile reached a height of about 6,000 kilometers, or approximately 3,700 miles, before it began its descent toward Japan. The message from North Korea was simple: we've finally developed working ICBMs, and we're not afraid to use them. It's a message the United States took seriously. Chaos and confusion reigned as news of the launch reached Hokkaido. Sirens blared, residents were ordered to evacuate, and U.S. soldiers in the country's Hokkaido base were told to take cover and prepare for the worst. Thankfully, the worst did not happen. But this show of strength from North Korea tells the world that its nuclear ambitions are only growing. Worse yet, it appears unafraid to flaunt the development of its new ICBMs in the face of Japan and its allies, the United States included, raising geopolitical tensions in the East Asia region in the process. For its part, Japan has stated that it will destroy any North Korean missile that enters its territory, but that may not matter to North Korea. Their show of power was a success. It had Japan and the US running scared, even if only briefly. As we enter 2024, the possibility of North Korea's anti-West rhetoric lining up with that displayed by Russia and China could lead to it becoming another nuclear player if a new Cold War begins. Event 6. Poland rises as Europe's unexpected military superpower. As war rages between Russia and Ukraine, and the majority of the EU scrambles to support Ukraine in its efforts, Poland has been quietly building itself up as a military superpower. The country's ruling party, PiS, claimed in 2023 that Poland will have Europe's strongest army in just 2 years, and it's hard to dispute those claims. The country's gone on a full-blown military shopping spree in 2023. It expanded its military budget to 3% of its gross domestic product, 1% over NATO's recommendation, and has plans to expand it further until it spends 5% of its GDP on defense. As for its military shopping spree, it's made hundreds of orders for South Korean, German, and even American vehicles. All told, the country's army currently numbers 150,000, with a further 30,000 reserve troops in a territorial defense force, with plans to boost those numbers to 300,000 by 2035, enough to make it continental Europe's most powerful military force by manpower alone. But there's more. The Polish economy is growing at an astounding rate in comparison to the rest of Europe, reaching an average growth rate of 3.6%. By contrast, the UK's growth over the last 10 years averages out to about 0.5% per year. According to several sources, including the New European, that disparity is large enough that Poland could potentially overtake the British economy by 2030. But why is Poland investing so much in getting stronger? Russian aggression in Ukraine is part of the answer. Poland long called for sanctions on Moscow before the Ukraine invasion forced the EU to implement them. Even now, it's calling for even stronger sanctions on everything from Russia's farming products to its oil and gas. And that should not surprise you. Poland knows what it's like to live under Russian rule. For most of the latter half of the 20th century, it was a communist state that was essentially under the Soviet Union's thumb, and it absolutely doesn't want to return to those dark days. Additionally, growing stronger means Poland will have a much stronger voice in the EU. If this trend continues, the country may even become one of the EU's major players, shifting the balance of power in the collective over to the East for the first time since its creation. Event 7. BRICS welcomes 6 new members. For the majority of its existence, BRICS has been a loose collective of 5 countries – Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa – that have worked together to improve each other's economies. Though anti-West sentiment has always existed in the group, especially from the Chinese and Russian sides, its focus lay more on the economic policy side of things than it did on anti-West rhetoric. That may have changed in 2023. April saw BRICS announce the admission of 6 new member nations, forming what some in the media are calling BRICS Plus. That would be newsworthy alone. with BRICS membership ostensibly helping those new countries strengthen their economies. But it's the nature of many of those members that may result in BRICS becoming a more powerful geopolitical player moving forward. Iran, Egypt, Argentina, Saudi Arabia, Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates are the organization's new members, and many of those countries have anti-West sentiments of their own. Some are even suggesting that the addition of these new members was done as much to strengthen Chinese and Russian influence over the group as it was to help those members with their economic struggles. If China and Russia are able to act in direct cooperation with countries like Iran, for instance, BRICS could transform into a more anti-West organization with an agenda of upsetting the current Western-focused geopolitical balance. Interestingly, the expansion also puts India in a tough position. Of all BRICS members, it's the one that tries the hardest to walk the line between East and West, hoping to maintain good relationships with both sides. This expansion and the potential drive toward anti-West sentiment it may introduce into BRICS could force India to make the difficult choice of either leaving the organization to maintain good relations with the West or embracing an anti-West position that would go against its decades-old agenda of neutrality. For the West, more members in BRICS could see countries like Iran find a way to sidestep sanctions placed on them, undermining the power of Western nations around the world while also strengthening its enemies. Event 8. The Pink Tide 2.0 washes over South America. Over the last 5 years, South American politics have been making a sharp turn toward the left, while many other countries lean right. In truth, the majority of this move toward the left, dubbed the Pink Tide 2.0 by the media, took place in 2022. Brazil, Colombia, and Chile all elected left-leaning governments during that year, with the leftist politicians taking advantage of anti-incumbent sentiment and a desire for change to achieve a sweeping victory. They joined Mexico and Argentina in those shifts to the left. But in 2023, we saw the impact of Pink Tide 2.0 firsthand. For instance, the new Pink Tide has created numerous opportunities for China in South America. The right-wing populists that ruled the region throughout the last decade were generally antagonistic towards China, creating gulfs in their relationships with Beijing. Now the stage is set for much of Latin America to revitalize its political and diplomatic relationships with Beijing, creating a situation where those countries could reduce their reliance on the United States. We're already seeing hints of this with the BRICS expansion mentioned previously. Argentina's inclusion strengthens its ties with China, and Beijing will be very happy to see its influence rise in the region. More recently, South America's Pink Tide appears to have taken a collective stand against Israel. Bolivia severed diplomatic ties with the Middle Eastern nation over what it saw as disproportionate responses to Hamas's attacks, with Colombia's President Gustavo Petro using X, formerly Twitter, to say if Israel does not stop the massacre of Palestinian people, we cannot be there. The leaders of Chile, Honduras, and Argentina also voiced their displeasure. Additionally, the fact that the United States funded several dictatorships, including those in Guatemala and Argentina, during the Cold War, is still fresh in the memory of many South American people. A stand against Israel might be seen as a stand against the United States, and that's dangerous news for an America that's already trying to be as diplomatic as possible in guiding Israel away from its current course of action. Event 9. Countries all over the world increasing their military spending. Poland is far from the only country that increased its military spending in 2023. It seems that a large number of countries, especially those worried about the war between Russia and Ukraine, are following in Poland's footsteps. China, for instance, already the world's second-largest military spender, pledged to increase its defense budget by 7.2% in March 2023. The Russians have also upped their spending, with estimates from Reuters saying the country's military budget will account for about a third of its total expenditure by the time we hit 2024. Those are obvious big spenders. Russia's in the midst of a war, while China has been undergoing a program of military modernization and expansion for decades. But what about Finland? It increased its defense budget by 36% in 2022. Lithuania wasn't far behind, implementing its own 27% increase. And even Sweden spent big by upping its budget 12%. Moving the focus back to Asia, Saudi Arabia also increased its spending by 5.7% in 2023, reaching an eye-watering $69.1 billion, the fifth largest military budget in the world. And that's just a handful of countries. But what's clear here is a definite trend towards spending more on militaries. Seems that a lot of countries are gearing up for conflict, and with the actions taken by Russia, China's continuous expansion, and what's happening in Israel right now, who can blame them? Event 10. France on fire amidst pension and police protests. Defiance against policymakers defined France in 2023. It all started right at the beginning of the year when the country's president Emmanuel Macron used his executive powers to force through pension reforms that would take the age of retirement in France from 62 to 64. Unsurprisingly, the people of France didn't really like that, and they showed their displeasure with months of protests, many of which turned violent. Sporadic initial protests were soon transformed into a national movement, resulting in protests and strike action that lasted for 14 days. All of this culminated in the storming of Paris's 2024 Summer Olympics headquarters on June 6th, with protesters briefly, albeit somewhat peacefully, occupying the building in a last-ditch effort to convince France's lawmakers to change their minds. It didn't work. The protests ended, leaving behind a trail of burnt-out cars and unhappy people. Then, a 17-year-old teenager was shot during what should have been a routine traffic stop on June 27th. France erupted into protest again. Riots broke out, this time with an anti-police sentiment, and France was in flames once more. Even an attempted ban on the protests backfired, with over 2,000 protesters ignoring the ban to march through Paris's Place de la République in July. A further ban implemented on July 15th was put in place due to a lack of police to oversee the protests, though some commentators, such as those at France 24, pointed to this ban as an excuse to introduce more repressive laws by the authorities. One thing is clear, France spent much of 2023 mired in internal turmoil. The result was the country was perhaps less focused on its international duties, especially in the EU, than it might have otherwise been, all of which potentially cleared the way for Eastern powers like Poland to start building their own power bases within the organization. Will we look back on 2023 as a turning point in geopolitics, or is this just another year of conflict in humanity's violent history? Only time will tell, but now we want to hear from you about the geopolitical events of 2023 that stick in your mind. Are there any we've missed from the list? What do you think 2024 holds for the geopolitical landscape and the world at large? Tell us your thoughts below, then check out China versus United States 2023 military army comparison. Who would win? Or watch this video instead.